Welcome to the public reading for Wall Literary Journal 2018. I'm Gina Victoria Schaefer, a professor of English here at Saddleback who serves as faculty advisor for the journal. My co-host this evening is Noah East, the editor-in-chief of Wall 2018. Noah graduated with an associate in arts degree for transfer in English from Saddleback in May of this year. Although he's now attending Cal State Fullerton as an English major, he's still very much a part of the Saddleback scene as a tutor here at Saddleback. He specializes in giving students supportive and constructive guidance in writing, a skill he deployed masterfully while leading the staff of Wall this past spring. As a perceptive, diligent, and industrious editor-in-chief, Noah inspired his staff to produce a superb edition of Wall. Tapping into his extensive knowledge of philosophy and literature, Noah found the perfect theme for the works in this issue, the hero's journey. But this hero, who goes through trials, denials, and finally redemption and triumph, is not the paradigmatic male. Instead, this hero crosses boundaries of class, race, age, and gender, sometimes inspired by the Me Too movement. This hero could be a young man struggling to overcome the pain of a broken family, a young man overcoming the physical and psychological challenge, a young woman overcoming the physical and psychological challenges of anorexia nervosa, a little girl discovering a deep connection with the grandfather who inspired her to redeem herself, a poet celebrating his African American heritage through his love for Maya Angelou, and a mother trying out those tasty waves as she surfs on the sea while her son proudly watches on the shore. I'd like to acknowledge and thank some of Wall's most loyal supporters whose financial, physical, and moral support ensure that we're able to showcase the impressive array of words and images produced by students on this campus. I'd like to invite those of you who are standing to go ahead and fill in. There's some seats over here and over there, so please come on and sit in. There's a list of the supporters in the acknowledgments on the back of your program, so please take a moment to look at those names. But there's actually at least a couple of people who are listed here this evening, so please stand when I call your name. First of all, Kevin O'Connor, Dean of the Liberal Arts Division. Dean O'Connor has been a stalwart supporter of Wall. I'd also like to thank Professor of Speech Larry Radden. His students will be doing oral interpretations of some of the stories this evening. He's been involved in preparing his students to provide dramatic renditions of some of the pieces. And occasionally we have the pleasure of seeing him perform, which he'll do tonight. So thank you, Larry. So there may be some others in the audience who I'm not seeing right now, but definitely thank you for coming as our audience. And thank you to all of you who've helped make this evening possible and contributed to the continued development of Wall.
So how does Wall get built every year? It's developed by students who enroll in English 160, a 3-unit class that meets in the spring semester. The student staffers read submissions of poems, personal narratives, and short stories, and review photographs and artwork, all from Saddleback College students, and select the pieces that will end up in our 124-page journal. Once the selection process is completed, editors get involved in editing and proofreading, which is a tedious, time-consuming, but necessary task to ensure a high-quality publication. And it has paid off. Since 2012, the journal has won a first-place award in the national competition among college literary magazines, sponsored by the American Scholastic Press Association. In fact, last year's 2016 edition received a special commendation through a first place with Special Merit Magazine Award for an outstanding example of a scholastic publication in format, content, and presentation.
And just last month, Wall was named Best Overall Magazine in the Pacific Western Division in a national literary magazine contest sponsored by the Community College Humanities Association. For the written works to be read this evening, poems will be presented in their entirety, while excerpts of the short stories and personal narratives will be featured. Please be sure to read the rest of the works on your own. And please note that in your program, the page number for each of the works is listed, so please feel free to follow along in your books. And I hope everyone got a copy of Wall on the side. And the artwork, when we discuss the art pieces, they'll be projected on the screen. So the very first piece this evening is The Cartoon, a short story by Cy Hill, who served as one of Wall's fiction editors and was the recipient in 2017 of an Outstanding Creative Writing Award. Cy, could you please come up to talk a little bit about your piece and your background?
Thank you. I'm very proud to be part of this magazine, and I encourage all of you to look into it. I've never been published. Overnight success. It's available for you too. This is something where you can, we probably looked at about 30 short stories, ended up picking 10, and a wide variety of stories. They covered everything. I mean, if you go back and you look through these things, they're all different. They all came from different kinds of people who had different voices and different things to say. This is a huge community of very diverse people, as I'm sure you know. And if you become part of this magazine, it'll give you a chance to see all that's going on here, all that's going on, all the different ages, all the different backgrounds. Personally, I'm retired, I'm enjoying it, and let's get on with it. Thank you.
The Cartoon will be presented in an oral interpretation by Shirley Aramo, a former Wall fiction editor and featured actress in many Saddleback College productions, and Noah East.
It would be a lark to sit before a cartoonist at the Pike Place Market. A joke. Last night, 2 of her oil paintings were hung in an art exhibition, side by side with her husband's oils. And wouldn't a cartoon of her be the perfect ironic token?
He recognized her immediately. A small, delicate bird nested before him, posing demurely atop a wooden stool. Even after 14 years, she still had that lovely fine-boned face and those large, deep-as-ocean brown eyes. She was 3 years his junior, a couple inches shorter, and still elfinly thin. Good morning.
Did she recognize that voice?
You are Sketcho? He pointed at the sign that read Sketcho. He was already intently working on the cartoon. Can you talk while you work?
Of course. He briefly made eye contact, miffed. She should at least remember that. He never cared who watched him work.
The manner, the height, the eyes. It could be him. But Sketcho appeared so much older than the Jacob Bailey she knew, a popular untenured art student at California State College, popular more for his artwork than his classroom manner. Students wanted to learn to create as he created. There was a time when she did too. I'm here for an art exhibition at the Hujari.
I've never been in there.
Oh, it's on...
I know where it is. Stuffed shirt, cliched cerebral art. He was contemptuous of the place.
A couple of my pieces are hanging there.
That got him. A kick in the stomach. So her art had gone that way. What medium?
Oils.
That was her husband's forte. Congratulations.
Thank you. My husband is there now at the exhibition.
Is he an artist too? As soon as he said that, he wished he could retract it. Her husband, who would now be in his mid-50s, had been the chairman of the art department, probably still was. Jacob judged his professional superior's work as derivative, blasé, and boring.
With that comment, its tone, she knew. This gnarled piece of granite before her was indeed the former art teacher. Our work is being displayed side by side.
Give him my congratulations.
She suddenly wondered what she would do with this cartoon. Would she ever show it to her husband? He would gloat. Young, excitable Jacob Bailey, reduced to drawing cartoons at a street fair setting, revealed as a sideshow buffoon. Unstable, volatile, wasted talent, gone to seed, a nowhere man. How many women receive 2 proposals of marriage within the same day? Jacob had accepted a job at an Oregon community college. There was a path to tenure there. There would never be one where he was, not with Warren as his chairman. Would she marry Jacob? Would she share her life with him? She refused him at a bar overlooking the Pacific. Will you get tenure at that community college, Jacob? Or will you upset everyone at that school as you have Warren here? That's how she refused him. Warren is established in his career. I need that stability. I need a man who is established in his career.
He thought she loved him. Maybe she did. More to himself than to her. He said, "What happens now?"
14 years later, here they were, face to face with his sketch pad in between. He completed his work with the signature Sketcho at the bottom right-hand corner and applied a stamp at the bottom left that said, "Created at Pike's Place Market on this date." Then he carefully separated the work from the sketch pad. She apprehensively took the cartoon in her hands, turned it over, and saw who she had been 14 years ago. In his classroom, her face was in the act of turning from him, looking towards the door. Model and artist knew what she was turning towards, about to leave his life. It was not a simple cartoon. It was unmistakably something very special, very personal. She momentarily wondered what her life with Jacob would have been like had she not gone out that door. But she'd made her choice. Because of it, 2 of her paintings hung on a wall several miles away. Jacob named the price. She gave him double. It was an even exchange.
I'd like to introduce our next reader, Anessa Rodriguez, for her poem, Dawn.
Hi, my name's Nessa Rodriguez, and this is my second year at Saddleback as an English major. So I initially started writing Dawn a couple years ago, but at the time I didn't really know what it was supposed to be about. When I heard about submitting to Wall, I revisited it again, and I realized that it was a love story between 2 people who had both been broken by the world in different ways. But at its heart, it is a story about the vulnerability of showing someone your deepest flaws and knowing that they may not accept you, but trusting that they will anyway. So I hope you enjoy. I look at you, and for a moment I am drowning, seawater filling my lungs, sunlight turning the water into a shimmering gloom. It would be a beautiful way to die in your eyes. You do not see this, that I am kneeling before you, my palms raised, arms lax, scars roll over my hands like sea foam washing over the backs of my hands, my fingers. My heart line is fractured, my lifeline severed. This is all I have, I am saying. Seawater crests over the back of my throat, fills my mouth with salt water and fish. They glow in my mouth like stars, whisper messages lost at sea. Do not lose him, they say, voices like cracked sea glass. Do not lose him. A part of the ocean is tucked under your collarbone, water boiling and the sky a streak of charcoal. This is all I have, you are saying, eyes somewhere on the horizon. The sun hasn't risen and the sky is a ribbon of pulsing navy, but I placed my hand on your heart beneath roiling waves. Okay, I say, sea glass biting the inside of my cheek, copper on my tongue. Okay. Light begins to prod at the dark line of the horizon when our eyes finally meet, shaky, wavering in the half-gloom. You place your hand over mine. Oceans freeze if they never see the sun, you say, tentatively tracing the scars on my fingers. Something cracks in my chest. Warmth pools at the base of my throat. Yes, I say, but I mean, what have you done to me? Red and orange trickle across the sky, bleed and bloom into a burst of ochre. We meet like the first light of dawn.
Our next presenter is Noah. Noah's getting a workout in this first half. He will read his poem, The First Philosopher.
The first philosopher. What great comforts do I miss of the cave? They are too numerous for one to count. This illusion of heaven, expansive horizon, serene skylines make one feel small. That earthen holy ceiling, our heavens and everything beneath it, it was ours and ours alone, rulers of our own domain. In the cave, one could not help but feel tall. Outside, that yellow sun has faded. A blue curtain lifts to reveal darkness, millions of stars, with billions of planets, at least 500 billion caves between them all. In simplicity, we found our comfort, but with reckless folly, how they ignored that life was more than a mere projection, settled on that earthen and unholy wall. Next, I'd like to introduce Olga Perelman for her work on the cover for Sign of the Times.
Hi, I'm Olga Perelman, and first off, I want to start by saying thank you to The Wall, to everybody who participated in it. It's always really special to be a part of it. Okay, so about this piece, it's titled Sign of the Times, and I made this edition of prints a few semesters ago, and I remember the previous semester at that time, I had made my first edition of Suicide Prints, and I really enjoyed the process, so I thought, why not try it again, but make it a little more interesting. And one of our printmaking volunteers does these really beautiful, intricate, detailed, multi-layered suicide prints. So I think I was feeling a little inspired and ambitious and decided to try something out a little similarly. And my problem at that time, however, was that I had too many ideas. I really didn't know what to go with. But something that I kept coming back to was this idea of flowers in objects where they didn't really belong, like flowers in a toilet bowl, flowers in shoes, flowers in a skull, and so forth. So I decided to try this idea of flowers in shoes, and I really always was fascinated with the idea of shoes hanging on a telephone wire, and then I paired that with these clouds in the background, and basically, I found the juxtaposition of something pretty paired with something ugly or masculine to be pretty interesting. And also, I found it interesting that shoes on power lines could signify a variety of things, such as bullying or drugs in that area, or even a local death. So I liked the idea of these shoes being contrasted with a vivid sky. So when planning out this piece, I first drew it digitally, and then I sketched it full size and planned all my layers, and I realized that this was going to be my biggest print that I'd ever done before. It's like about this big or so, and it was going to be 10 layers. So I got to carving, and in printmaking, usually you start with the lightest color and then go darker, darker, and each color is its own layer. So I would carve, ink, print, and repeat times 10. But after a few layers, this piece started being very problematic. I noticed that the ink wasn't laying as smoothly as it should when it would print. It would kind of give this puckering texture like an orange peel, and as a perfectionist, I didn't find that very pretty. And also, the ink wasn't drying as fast as it should have when I was printing, so it took me a bit longer to work on than it was supposed to. So it was just a very frustrating process. But also at that time, Harry Styles' first single, Sign of the Times, came out, and also the music video came out a little bit later. And that song and video are both super powerful and really meant a lot to me. So I realized that as I lifted up that final layer of that first print, I looked at it and instantly knew that I wanted to title it Sign of the Times. And because I had basically created an ode to this song without even realizing it. But I feel like it was meant to be because the emotions that are evoked in the song are things that I felt when making it, and also things that I feel and think about now when I look at this piece. So basically what I think it means is how there's a lot of ugliness and conflict in the world today, but there's still that good and hope that's powerful if we choose to turn it to it, or something like that.
Thank you, Olga. Olga also has the distinction of being the only artist to have her work featured on Wall 2 years in a row. Her art piece was featured in 2017 Wall. And the piece was selected unbeknownst. The staff didn't know that it was the same artist, but they ended up choosing her piece, so congratulations again. So our next presenter is Danielle Peterson, who's going to discuss her contemporary pro-femme pillows.
I would just like to extremely thank everyone from Wall because they actually reached out to me to ask about submitting my pieces, so I didn't really submit them myself. So I'm extremely thankful to that because of Wall, I'm like published for the first time as an artist, and it's super cool and it's awesome seeing it, and it's a double spread, and I'm extremely happy and excited and stoked, and just thank you so much. The pieces that I have featured here, you know, I feel like I've dabbled in arts throughout my entire life. Arts was like the only thing that really stuck when my parents were like trying to put me in after school things. And then I've spent a couple years at Saddleback, and the ceramics department here is really fantastic. It's really a home and a community that's super special. And if you ever have the opportunity to take a ceramics class, I would say do it at Saddleback, hands down, it's great. But I am so extremely like interested in social issues and issues that involve like minorities and people that don't have like the highest opportunities available to them, and just the complexity that's involved with like a woman's role within society throughout art cultural development is something that I think is so interesting. And I try to, you know, nowadays incorporate that into my pieces. And if you see like some of my ceramic work, I try to like inform the audience of like some of the things that, you know, why it is the way it is, or like encourage like the feminist movement because it's so relevant nowadays. And I think a lot of people have like a negative connotation associated with that, and it shouldn't be that way. I understand like radical of anything is not a good thing, but the movement overall is good, and it's important to me, and I try to like, you know, make that like show through my work, and it's important to me, and I just think it's cool that I'm here and talking about it. And thank you all for being here, and thank you for letting me talk right now. Cool. Thank you.
Our next presenter has a piece with a very intriguing title. When I read this title, I really wanted to read this piece. It's a personal narrative by Harriet Himmelstein called How Harvey Weinstein Ruined the Bolshoi Ballet.
I have been a perpetual student since kindergarten, and I am forever grateful to Saddleback College for its emeritus program, because it has been wonderful, and I'm very proud of my class in creative writing with Susan Hecht. And tonight's story, this is a précis of it, though. The whole thing is in the booklet. How Harvey Weinstein Ruined the Bolshoi Ballet. Here I am making myself comfortable in my 5th row center seat at the Aliso Viejo movie theater, while Katerina, the charming host, is explaining on the screen, first in French, then in English, then in Russian, our view of the lobby of the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, Russia. We are attending a live broadcast of the ballet Le Corsaire, The Pirate, in the refurbished venue of Russia's premier government-sponsored ballet company. A synopsis of the first act appears in 6 languages. I quickly read that we will be in a village in the Mediterranean, probably Morocco, where a pasha is expected to purchase slaves for a harem. The audience applauds as the conductor takes his way to the podium. He taps his baton and the overture begins. The curtain opens to a colorful, bustling scene of merchants, women selling wares, a white-veiled girl tending flowers on her balcony, and a very old, bent slave dealer hobbling around getting everything ready for his honored guest. The pasha, looking very well fed and prosperous with his neatly trimmed 3-day growth, enters pompously. I look at him and I think Harvey Weinstein. His eyes roam over the girls for sale and catches sight of the white-veiled young thing on the balcony, tending her garden, declaring he must have her. The dealer mimes, "No, that is my ward, and she is not for sale." The pasha's guards rough him up until he finally agrees to sell Medora, not knowing she has already met and fallen in love with a shipwrecked pirate, Conrad. But I cannot get Weinstein out of my mind. I shake my head to try to erase him, but he stays with me through the whole first act. At intermission, I hobble down to refresh myself and think I must not let that insatiable brute rain on my parade. Today, they are glorifying the buying and selling of women unable to escape their fate in a long ago fairy tale time, and yet it is still happening. Maybe not as publicly, but still happening. I throw cold water on my face and climb back to my seat. I must not think of Weinstein. But seeing the pasha in his beautiful robin's egg blue silk kurta, Weinstein has been replaced in my mind by Hugh Hefner and his silk pajamas and bunnies. Stop! I want to concentrate on the choreography, not the criminality. Act 3 has 5 scenes, each more exciting than the one before. Somehow, Bill Cosby fills my mind. I shake my head and blink my eyes to get rid of him. With the pasha and his men busy, the pirates escape to their vessel with Medora and the rest of the women. But there is a terrible storm at sea, and thanks to animation, photography, and our imagination, we see the ship break in two. Rolling waves seem to overflow the stage right to the footlights. But all is not lost. Conrad appears carrying Medora. We know that they will live happily ever after somewhere without dirty old men to bother them. The next presentation of the Bolshoi will be a contemporary ballet, The Taming of the Shrew. The Taming of the Shrew? The Russians really need to get their up to date with women's rights because I cannot get them out of my mind.
Our next piece, the creator of our next piece, the photographer, was not able to make it this evening, but I do have a statement prepared from Amy Kaplan. This is her piece, Fight Like a Girl. She writes in her email, I created this image with the help of 2 phenomenal women, the model Natalia and the makeup artist Melinda. Together, we came up with the idea to create an image that portrayed women not just as beautiful, but also strong and brave. I wanted the focus to be on her eyes. So I used a ring flash, which can be seen in the reflection of her eyes. We all know that the eyes are the windows to the soul, and I feel that this image reflects her innocence and her power. There is no denying that this woman is beautiful, and there is no denying that this woman is strong. We do not have to fit within a particular mold to be seen as beautiful.
Welcome back, everyone. So, our next presentation is titled Cheeto Puffs. It's by Donna Gassemi. Donna?
Hi, my name is Donna Gassemi. I'm a former Saddleback student. I'm actually just transferred to UCLA this fall. I am majoring in English with an emphasis in creative writing. I've always enjoyed writing since I was a little girl, but I've always had a particular fondness for short stories. I got the idea for Cheeto Puffs one day when I was sitting on the couch, kind of procrastinating all the things I needed to do, when I heard a weird noise come from upstairs. And I remember specifically thinking, well, if anything happens, at least I can ask for an extension. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy.
Cheeto Puffs will be presented in oral interpretation by Larry Radden.
This has to be the lowest moment of her life. Her face drenched with tears, sitting on the couch, shoving Cheeto Puff after Cheeto Puff into her mouth, watching yet another episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. She told herself that she would never be one of those girls who turns into a mess after the breakup of a significant other. Why would they waste their tears on a man? Men aren't worth your tears. Men are barely worth your time. Sure, once in a while, a decent one will come around and treat you like some flowery flower, like some aerosol spray, but then the romance ends and you end up with nonsense. And then it's to cover the fact that he's just kind of like shit. So yes, Nora would make fun of the girls who completely lost themselves after a breakup, but now, here she is, face covered with neon orange crust, full of broken pieces of her heart, trying to fill the void with bad reality TV. God, she hates herself. She doesn't even know how long she's been watching that stupid show. It's probably been a year since she's gotten off the couch. The blanket that she's wrapped herself in has gone from a pristine white to an orange gray. There used to be a box of Kleenex next to her, but now all that remains is snot-covered crumpled tissue and 3 candy bar wrappers. He was supposed to be the one, you know. But it seems like he's not the one. Suddenly, Nora hears a bang coming from upstairs. She pays no mind to it. She's gonna have to finish her 23rd bag of Cheeto Puffs. Whatever, she doesn't need him. She doesn't need his soft brown eyes, his strong arms. All she needs is her Cheeto Puffs. They can be a calm, soothing voice. Another crash from upstairs. The dog must have knocked something over. Who is she kidding? She's a wreck without him. He was her everything and her rock. Again, she hears footsteps. But this time they don't seem to be far away. She looks up expecting to see the dog, but instead she sees this skinny guy wearing what looks to be a makeshift ninja outfit and a ski mask. Shit, you have a gun! Put your hands up! Is this some kind of a joke? The guy turns a pistol towards the ceiling and fires. There's a bang and some plaster falls down on his head and it hits him. He grimaces. Ow! Do what I frickin' say or I'll shoot you! Give me the frickin' money! Put the money in the bag! Money? Nora sniffles and wipes some snot from her face. Don't move, damn it! Put the money in the bag! This isn't a bank. You don't rob somebody's house like that. Then Show me where the money is. That's also not, damn it. I don't know. Stop crying. You're distracting me. I can't stop fretting when I'm frickin' being robbed. Can't you just shoot me and frickin' leave? That would make the whole day a lot better. It's kind of morbid. Is there something wrong? Well, I mean, my boyfriend broke up with me. The man puts the gun down, sits next to Nora on the couch. Well, what happened? You see, it all started last week when he replied to one of my text messages with K.
I swore I'd never eat another Cheeto Puff after reading that story, but somehow it sounds really tempting right now. Would you like one, Noah?
Certainly.
Yum.
The next piece I can't announce because, well, it's an ellipsis. It's by Brooke Campbell, the editor-in-chief of Wall 2017.
Introduced me. My name's Brooke. I'm a former student at Saddleback College. I was the editor-in-chief of the 2017 edition of Wall. And as always, thank you to Professor Schaefer for everything that she's done for me and the experiences I've had here. I'm very, very grateful and thankful to the Wall Literary Journal and to Noah, I guess. Good morning. An echo through the room that bounced off the walls and vibrated through my person, I remember. It's because of people like you, a luminous language on the page that reflected the brightest light and ignited my soul, I remember. He is lucky to have you, a casted dark shadow that collapsed the surrounding oxygen and weighed heavy on my heart, I remember. Thank you.
Our next presenter is Ashton Reamer, who is one of the graphic editors, graphic designers and layout editors for Wall 2018. She was involved, along with Sajal Banker and Atra Gavarkis, in designing the cover, and she also provided this illustration for the poem Cages, which is on the facing page.
Okay, so hi, I'm Ashton. So I'll give you a background. I worked a couple years in marketing. I got my degree in marketing in 2012, and I decided I really liked the artistic aspects of it. I really liked the graphic design, kind of designing things that would help with the marketing. So that's why I decided to come back to Saddleback and get my degree in graphic design. And then last year for the 2017 version of The Wall, I had another piece that I illustrated someone's poem, and that's what led me to doing graphic design this year. And then, so this year's piece I'll talk about a little bit. Actually, I was asked to illustrate this piece, and it's kind of hard for me to describe exactly what I think it's about. So I think it's just about someone who's really struggling with themselves. And if you turn to page 51, actually, it's kind of not a reference here because someone hasn't read their poem yet. But if you turn to page 51, you can kind of see the poem that they wrote. And it just seems like someone's really struggling with themselves and kind of who they're supposed to be and who they think who they're supposed to be and who they are, and they just feel really frustrated, and they feel like there's a demon inside them that they're kind of struggling with. So the way that they described it, I couldn't really tell if they were looking in at the demon and that was what was holding them back, or the demon was within them, or they were in the cage, or there was someone in a cage that they were looking at. So I feel like the way that I illustrated it made it seem like either they were looking in at the demon, or the demon was looking at it with them. So they're either trapped or they're seeing someone who is trapped. So that's kind of the way that I illustrated it here. Just kind of a self-struggle and trying to figure out who you are. So that's what I came up with. Thank you.
So our next piece is titled Waiting to Die by Michael Rosenkrantz. I don't believe he's here today. No. And we will have an oral interpretation by Joshu Tycuff.
So, Before Joshua does his rendition, just want to tell you a little bit about Michael. Michael was a student in my Intro to Creative Writing class, and he wrote this piece for this class, and fellow students were very impressed with it. He also was literary associate for Wall, and he was one of the valedictorians who spoke at the graduation in May, and he's now attending UCLA, intending to major in English. So we're very pleased to be able to present his story.
On the first day of the barrage at the northernmost front, Antoinette Bell was caught dreaming. She was dreaming of a ball, of the handsome man she had once danced with, and whose name she could not remember, of her parents, and of the life that once existed outside of the dilapidated confinement of the triage tent, thousands of miles away from her home. That life was over now. When Antoinette finally opened her eyes with the sound of a concerto that seemed to play only for her, one that was moving into the recesses of her mind, she saw the burned remains of a man being rushed in through the opening of the triage tent. Of the 4 months that Antoinette had been stationed on the front, this was new. While often terrified, she had never actually had to treat anyone, with 2 men whose faces she would remember forever, through what seemed to be the remaining vestige of their comrade on the steel table in front of her. A mess of blood, burnt flesh, and a wheeze from a shape that she was almost certain was no longer a man. They waited for the briefest of seconds, before taking off their helmets, bowing, and leaving. This ritual always struck Antoinette as odd. She had never seen it up close, but when she did, it never seemed natural. How could they leave their own? It was only then that she heard the distant sounds of the war, the one that changed so much, and she seemed to come to some level of understanding, if any. It was only the second cough of the man beneath her that brought her attention back. He was dying, that much was sure, and there was little that she could do to save him. Abatha nodded to Antoinette. They proceeded. Given Antoinette's inexperience and youth, Abatha's time in the war took seniority. Once she had entered the tent, there was little to do but follow her. They grabbed instruments and began to administer whatever aid was possible. Abatha wasted little time in cutting away at the tough fabric of his uniform. Up close, the man could move only his hands, which now shook as his full torso was revealed. Antoinette dropped her scissors and moved away. Abatha moved closer and began operating. "You have a responsibility," Abatha said as she washed her hands. "Am I to take care of him? We have no one else." It seemed that settled it. On the night that the nameless man almost died, Antoinette heard him whisper. She was replacing his bandages, which were barely working considering their limited supplies at the front, and was taken aback by his voice, which had emanated so softly she almost didn't hear it. She leaned in again and made out one word. "Book." With so little strength, the man nodded toward the crumpling heap lying next to his cot. Antoinette ambled over and began rifling through his bloodied clothes. Though she half expected the man to be delusional, it only took seconds to discover that he wasn't. It was a small journal, one that Antoinette could barely fathom to hold given its many red stains. When she turned back to him, he was fast asleep, his stomach moving up and down, his body shaking with each breath. Antoinette quietly sat down next to the candle, opened the journal, and began reading. Antoinette sat by the flickering candle as the sleeping man rested. She could hear his rasp and shortness of breath caused by the inflammation of his wounds. One of the aides had removed the shell casings while Antoinette had taken his clothes to be burned. She held in her hands everything this man valued, the last piece of property he would have if his wounds subsided. Something told Antoinette that the soldier didn't have much longer. On the second day they shared their first conversation. He was hardly better. His voice not higher than a whisper. He caught Antoinette unaware. Again she leaned in. "Book." Antoinette nodded and showed him that it was safe. His head was covered in wrappings, but he seemed to nod. "Words." She was unsure then, but his one free hand seemed to long for some kind of instrument. Antoinette shook her head, mouthing to him that he was weak, to rest, to sleep. It was only hours earlier that Abatha had come by and checked on him. She was morose, knowing that there was little to do except wait for him to die. Antoinette had also heard the news, and was always checking that he wasn't awake to hear it. Did he understand how grave his condition was? Was that why he was asking for something to write with? She felt guilty, even as she stared directly into his eyes. There were other patients, other duties to fulfill, other men, but he was captivating. And soon enough, as the day wore on, she would come by and check on him. With such events going on, she enjoyed those few moments of respite, of being with him. and of knowing that he was comfortable. So close to death it seemed, but just as alive all the same. Then he asked her, "Die." Those were the words he'd mouthed to her. She jumped. Abatha was down the line handling other patients and had stopped caring for him. As Antoinette leaned closer, she heard the word again. She backed away and sat down next to him. When looking over his entire body, she hardly realized the pain he must have been suffering through. Yes, they had given him as many drugs as were available, but even that failed to dull the internal damage, or at least it seemed that way. Antoinette was unsure how to respond and merely moved his hands back into place. She knew, of course, what he was asking for. The drug. It could end everything with a simple prick. She stood and wiped her hands across her smock, and when she turned, he was asleep. She left quietly, hoping Abatha's watchful eyes wouldn't soon catch her absence. Antoinette pushed past her guilt and began reading, soon becoming lost in flow and rhythm of the life passing by in front of her. It took hours for her to finally wake up, finally realize she had reached the end of the book and the end of his life. It was those last words that had resonated most. She felt outside of the small cottage he had grown up, the wife he had left behind, the people of his town who seemed so proud of his journey to the front. She tried not to think of that last page, those solemn words that seemed to explain everything, nothing at once. A scene of terror. He'd written one so extreme that he'd committed a mortal sin. He dropped his weapon. Antoinette could barely make out the words at this point, the writing having been smeared with an equal mix of blood and what she could only assume were tears. A shakiness all too evident in his once perfect cursive. It was all that she needed to read. She closed the journal early that morning. Antoinette mustered up the courage to leave the triage tent and walk the elongated trench that had defined so many of her days. The battle had subsided earlier in the night, and it seemed a reprieve was at hand. So often Antoinette was stuck in the tent, but now she could breathe, even if it was only blood and dirt. Of course, she was never startled by the sight of men, especially as she stepped lower into the trench. They seemed to extend as far as the eye could see, a sea of misery, pain, and regret. As she walked past each soldier, many of whom barely acknowledged her existence, one soldier continued to stare at her. Antoinette was used to such a gaze, but for some reason this felt different. The man was short and stocky and removed his helmet. When he approached her, she meant to ask his name, but he was already motioning towards the tent. "How is he?" "He's doing all right, I suppose." Antoinette wasn't sure if anything she was supposed to say. The man shuffled his feet a bit, almost as if he was dying to say something of importance. "He's a good man, you know." "It seems that way." Antoinette was hoping to reassure him, but he interrupted suddenly. "It's okay to run. It's what they tell us, miss. It's not a bad thing. Not with what they've got over there." He paused for a second, almost as if there was more to say, but he bowed his head and returned to the trench. Antoinette never forgot these words, nor the decision that it brought to her as a result. That night, Antoinette ejected the man whose name she finally knew but would not say, and wondered if this was the last moment of intimacy she would ever have. He did not grip the sides of his cot. His hands were too weak and scarred. His broken legs did not struggle. Antoinette felt that his mind must have been somewhere else, a combination of the drug she had never used before, and the pain coursing through his body, and the realization that the end was now inevitable. When the sun rose, they would list his death, with no name, and his body would be mercifully driven past the trench. When the year passed and the war had subsided, when the men cried, when they cradled champagne, when Antoinette was told that her brother was on the Western Front, had been injured but had lived, she took a moment from the raucous celebration and sat where the old triage tent had once stood. The air was cold, the morning long, and the trenches half sunk into the earth like some crooked smile that Antoinette would have read in a novel. She took out the journal, felt its spine, felt the cover that reminded her of home and of the secrets that she would never reveal about the man who seemed distant to her now. She wept.
I might add that Michael is a recipient of an Outstanding Creative Writing Award from the Liberal Arts Division this past spring. So the next piece is an illustration by Sejal Banker. It looks like Sejal was not able to make it, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about her. I wanted to thank all three of the graphic designers, Ashton, whom you've heard from, Sejal, and Atra. Just did a beautiful job of designing this entire book in terms of just using really intriguing themes, the way that it's laid out in a kind of scaffolding and line, and the use of the little flower motif. So all these designers work together as a team beautifully to produce this piece. Sejal was a designer in India for several years. She received her certificate in graphic design from Saddleback, and she won an award in a student design competition from the Graphic Art Education Research Foundation. And she is a painter as well as a graphic designer. So this particular piece, I know a little bit about it because the story is about a young woman's struggle with a career decision. She's working as an intern in a hospital, and she just encounters some very gruesome and heart-wrenching scenes while she's there. And the story starts off with this nightmare that she has that she is holding a heart. And so the illustration that Sejal did sort of captures that sort of gothic horror of this young woman cradling the heart. And the story goes on to talk about the inner life of this young woman and what she decides to do as a result of this nightmarish encounter that she has. So thank you to Sejal.
And now we'd like to look at Atra Javarkis's illustration of the arrowhead. Is Atra here today? No, it looks like she's also not here. Atra, would you like to say some words on her behalf?
Sure. Yes, Atra is another graphic design student. We've been really fortunate to work with the designers and the graphic design department to supply us with such talented students. She completed her associate degree program in graphic design here at Saddleback in May. She had worked as a graphic designer for the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum for a year. She had previously received a BA in visual arts from the University of California, San Diego. She's also a painter as well as a designer, and she's interested in becoming a book illustrator. So I think this is a wonderful start. So this particular piece, The Arrowhead, was a personal narrative that was written by Martha Phillips, one of the staffers of WAL, in which she talks about special summers that she spent with her grandparents in Texas. And she talks about an incident in which she accidentally dropped an arrowhead, which was a special emblem for her grandfather, and it had special meaning. So Atra managed to capture that sense of, the broken arrowhead within the hands of the child, but she wasn't punished for it. There was no retribution, and she got to know her grandfather better, and he told her the special meaning of the arrowhead. So her hands are cradled in his hands, and of course you have the house in the background. So I think she has a wonderful career ahead of her as an illustrator. So thank you to Atra. Our next presentation is a personal narrative, Sengoku Reoccurring, written by Hef. It's 97 degrees outside, but my windows are tinted and the air conditioning is blasting, so I'm quite comfortable. I turn against the red. As I'm driving up the street, I see that the car next to me is a real piece of crap, an emerald green Honda with the paint peeling off the roof, the trunk, and the hood. It's got one black primered fender and the entire driver's side is dented and scratched. The rear window is held in place with duct tape. The steel wheels minus hubcaps are mottled with rust. The rear bumper is smashed and cracked. Beads of sweat run down the dark-skinned driver's forehead and under the filth that's covering his face. He's wearing a dirty white undershirt with the collar stretched out. Accordion music is blasting out of the car's scratchy speakers like a carnival from hell, and the singer wails and whines about God knows what. I arrive at work. The boss creeps stealthily around the corner. His vitriol catches me off guard, his verbal venom stinging my ears and necrotizing my self-confidence to the point where he can suck out my soul through a straw. Today, he's acting like a particularly arrogant prick, telling me I should work hard like he does so that I can make something of myself, as if that kind of cause and effect relationship actually exists. He has no idea what hard work really is. He's never cleaned out a sewer in Bangladesh or mined for diamonds in Sierra Leone, salvaged the toxic trash of Smoky Mountain, or broken his back picking strawberries in a hot, dusty field in Irvine. It's a mere coincidence that he was born a Caucasian male in one of the most prosperous milieus in the history of mankind, under a social order where white men rule with impunity and seemingly reap a disproportionate amount of the world's treasures, regardless of the amount of genuine effort they put in. I marvel why he doesn't recognize that his success, as he calls it, is almost exclusively the result of his good luck. Later, a couple of middle-aged guys dressed in business suits walk into the store. They're laying pretend bets on which sports team will prevail in this weekend's big game. They bicker about which players are truly worth their salaries and try to justify why the quarterback deserves $23.8 million a year for throwing a ball around, even though they both know that the outcome of the match will be forgotten before the next weekend even arrives. I noticed the ambient music coming out of the speaker grills in the ceiling, and it reminds me that today's pop stars fly on private planes and live in mansions. But Mozart spent the final years of his life begging for loans from friends. When fortunes can be made because we follow the fashion trends started by whores or choose to spend our time in darkened amphitheaters indulging our reveries, sequestered from the events of the rest of the world, I ponder how we assign value in our society these days. At home, after work, I turn on the TV. The reporter is talking about the torrential rains in Texas. It's not that kind of rain that makes Gene Kelly want to dance through puddles, though. It's the type of downpour that creation myths are written about. Homes have been destroyed, many people have died, and some folks will never recover from the resulting emotional and financial devastation. Yet the First Lady has a nerve to wear 5-inch designer stilettos on her trip to tour the Houston flood zone. Dear God, I wonder how high most people's standard of living would rise if we collected all the wealth on the planet and distributed it equally among the Earth's inhabitants. As college students, we study philosophy, math, economics, the sciences, and the works of the great scholars of Harvard, the Sorbonne, and the Lyceum. Yet no one seems to know how to promote equality in our own communities. Ironically, most of history's wars have been fought because the truths of the world's various religions provide conflicting answers to the question of why we are here and how we should behave. With the sum of all the intelligence collected over time available to us at the touch of a screen, I can't imagine why we've yet to figure out how to take care of each other. While one's sense of morality is relative to the time, place, and culture in which he or she lives, civility is absolute. You cannot accuse a cannibal of being unethical for eating the flesh of his fallen enemies, given that he is merely following the moral standards of his culture. But there is no excuse for indifference to issues of public concern other than selfishness. As we prepare for our futures, struggle with our present, and ask ourselves, what is my place in the world? We must recognize that we are all citizens of the same global society. We must also accept our responsibility to respect differing points of view, maintain balance in our ecosystem, and work together to make positive economic changes that enhance the common good. Behave otherwise, and we become a population of savages. That piece was written by Hef, which is a mononym for Kenneth Hefner, who calls himself an extremely mediocre ceramist, painter, writer, musician, dancer, photographer, and brewer, looking for his 5 seconds of fame. And he also calls himself a true 21st century Renaissance boy.
And with that, I'd like to introduce our last piece by Frances Clockie Fullwood, author of Human Being.
I'm Frances Clockie Fullwood. I write poems and songs. I feel honored to have my poem Human Being included in WAL 2018. The idea for Human Being came to me on February 17th and germinated throughout the day. I went to sleep that night thinking about it. Sometimes poems come to me in my dreams. When I awoke, the poem was in my mind, and I wrote it down. Thank you.
And Human Being will be read with oral interpretation by Jared Schreiner.
I know a man, he had a dream of a race called human being. I know a man, he had a dream, a vision of the future, not for one, two, or three, but for all who live and breathe and see. I know a man, he had a dream of a race called human being. Undefined by ancient labels, chains cannot bind these minds nor shackle to the past. We are the now, we are the future, we, human being. Neither black nor white, nor any other color that can be defined, walking free and tall, we, human being. With eyes sometimes blue and sometimes brown, what is the color of truth looking up to a clear sky, uncluttered by hate, this race called human being? I know a man, he had a dream of you, me, we, human being.
That concludes our public reading. If you're a student here at Saddleback, please think about submitting your work for the 2019 edition of WALL. There's submission forms on the table in the lobby and near the entrance. And if you'd like to join the staff of WALL, please pick up a flyer. If there's any students receiving extra credit for attendance, make sure you sign the sheet at the table. And thank you so much for being a great audience and sharing the stimulating and compelling words and works in this year's WALL.